Happy afternoon. I'm Catherine Allen. I am an assistant director at the main career center here at Duke.
And I'm Jen Agor, also one of the assistant directors, and both of us work with computer science and various other places with students. So kind of why we're connected to the collab.
Yeah.
And it is
Uh,
not
so,
February, so
and it's what? What do you
not
say?
February.
It's not. Oh my gosh. Wow. That's great. Okay, well, moving on. Here's a little bit of an overview of what we're covering today. So you'll see each of these different topics. But to get to the questions that Jen is talking about.
So if you can just throw your answers to these in the chat box if you're comfortable with that. We're just kind of curious how well you like your resume, 1 through 5, 1 being don't love it, 5 being it's awesome. And then the second question is, well, let's start with how well do you like your resume? Okay. So not a super amount of confidence or like, I don't really love it, but it's there kind of stuff. So we can talk to you a lot today about how to kind of improve the format and then definitely the structure of your accomplishment statements and how you're tailoring those resumes to what you're trying to do. So our second poll was, how confident are you in your resume based on your needs in being able to tailor it to different positions that you're looking at? And did you even know you needed to do that? Okay. So same kind of thing, not super amount of confidence, but everybody kind of has something that they're working with, so that's good. And we will talk further about tailoring your resume, but as we talk, think about when we say transferable skills and keywords and definitely the accomplishment statements and how you have those written out, those are all going to be really important when you're talking about tailoring your resume to specific positions. But we'll just kind of start with the basics quickly and talk about formatting. We see a lot of very full resumes, so people try to sometimes push the margins a little bit. We recommend never going below a 0.5 margin on any edge and having the margin being between 0.5 and 1 inches. And I would also just make sure that you're consistent. So if your side margins are 1/2 inch, then your top margins are as well. Otherwise, it looks a little unbalanced. We recommend that you never go below a 10-point font, and certainly trying to fill space with a larger font is the same as trying to fill a paper with words like very, very, very. So we don't do that as well. So looking at 10 to 12 point, something that's professional, something that's easy to read. I personally love a serif font, but sans serif now is like an Arial or a Calibri. Those are a little bit easier to read and they seem to be more modern. So people use that quite often as a font. And then as you go through, and we'll talk a little bit about formatting for each entry, but everything should be consistent. So if titles are one way, then they should stay that way through everything. If your dates, for instance, say January through October, make sure that every position is listed that way. Don't use January through October in one place and then fall in another place. Make sure that you're using the same type of wording. And then obviously formatting, italics, bolding, that sort of thing we'll talk about too and why to use that. But make sure that that's all consistent as well. And then spacing, you'll notice that a lot of times we will talk about maybe putting your dates to the right-hand side or spreading out information, making your bullet points take up the space that you have available. And part of that is because we want it to look really kind of consistent. You want the spacing to look good. A lot of white space on a resume can look to a recruiter like there's not a lot of information there, even if there is. So we want it to look full and we want it to be easy to read. So you also have to think about balancing that text and white space as far as not having too much text too. Because again, you all are at Duke, you do a lot of different things. Sometimes it can be hard to fit all those things on one page of a resume, which is how long most resumes should be. And so sometimes it gets really packed, and you want to be careful of that too. So we'll show you an example of the structure or a structure that we like in just a minute, but there's a bunch of different things that you can put on your resume. You would be surprised how many times we get resumes to review that don't have contact information in them. The whole point in putting out a resume is to have people call you and interview you, right? Or email you, whatever your preferred method is. So make sure that the top of your resume is your name, and contact information, phone number, email address, a LinkedIn account if you have one and you like it, potentially a GitHub if you have, or a link to an art portfolio, just kind of depending on what your background is and what kinds of things you might want employers to see about you. But you want them to be able to contact you really easily, so make sure that that stuff is highlighted in the top. Your next section should generally be education. I don't know if there are grad students here or not. You may not use your education on the top. If you've worked for a while and you have a pretty significant amount of experience first, you may then put your education at the bottom. But for the most part, when we're talking to undergraduate students or grad students who haven't really had a bunch of work experience yet, your education should be your first section, particularly going to a school like Duke. That's going to look good. It can catch the eye of people who know the school and their reputation, as well as alumni and people who have a connection to Duke in some way, and that's a hook for them to maybe read your resume. The next thing that you get into is relevant experience, and these can be a bunch of different things. So obviously work experience is something that can be in there. Research experience, if you work in labs and you do all kinds of stuff there. Volunteer experience, student org experience, projects. Again, if you have a portfolio or if you have a bunch of coding projects or you're working in engineering and you have a bunch of things that you've built and you want people to be able to understand the experience that you have and how you can really highlight that, a project section is really a great way to do that. And when employers are looking at resumes, they generally take somewhere around 6 seconds to decide whether they want to continue reading your resume or not. That's why we talk about being super clear, emphasizing the right things, and then your headings are super important to be able to help people understand what kind of information is on your resume, so they know right off the bat that you have the type of skills that they're looking for. So that's why I really love that projects section. I talked a little bit about campus and community involvement, but it doesn't have to be paid experience. Like I said, it can be student organization experience, it can be work study, it can be volunteering. There's all kinds of things that come out of your campus experience. And I think, as we talk later on about transferable skills, that's something that will definitely be shown in a lot of those experiences. So we covered a lot of this stuff. Oh, skills section. That's a pretty important one. So particularly, again, if you're in engineering, lab science kind of work, computer science, being able to easily pick out the skills that you have is going to be super important to an employer. So we suggest putting like a technical skills section right underneath your education if you are in a field like computer science, anything with technology, engineering, and lab sciences if you have that sort of thing, and listing out all of your computer languages or your lab skills, or engineering techniques like SolidWorks or MATLAB and things like that, so that people know that you're coming in with those skills. Honors and awards can be a section. I think it really depends on the type of position that you're applying for. Some of the more finance, banking kind of things are going to be, sometimes they ask for those types of things. And then for like medical school and grad school, things like that, honors and awards are going to be pretty important. But if you need to fill space, I would definitely put that in there. If you need to cut something, honors and awards would be the first thing that I cut. Unless it's something that's really nationally known, is pretty prestigious or unique, and really says something about you and your skills. Otherwise, those other pieces are probably more important because they show those skills about you, more so than I think an award does. And real quick, the relevant coursework piece. I think people get confused on relevant coursework sometimes because they think that that means kind of like all the courses you've ever taken. And when you're looking at that, think about the job description, think about what your major is. If you're a biology major, I wouldn't put a bunch of biology coursework on there unless maybe you're ahead of where you should be on your schedule, or you've taken something that's a little bit different, genomics, or something that may not be in a core curriculum. And again, looking for things that maybe make you stand out, maybe make you a little bit different. If you're in computer science, for instance, and you potentially have background in AI or machine learning, or if you're in research and stuff and you have data science experience, any of those kinds of, or if you're looking to go into like marketing or something, but you have a lot of economics and business experience, because those two things are connected so well, but they may not be as obvious that you would have. Adding those things in can really be important on relevant coursework. You don't have to have that section at all if you don't feel like there's anything that really sticks out as far as your coursework goes and you need that space elsewhere. So this is just an example. This is from our website, and we will send out the presentation to Sandra later so that she can email this to you all. But we have links at the end of this presentation for graduate resumes, our undergraduate resumes, and I think there's some CV examples in there as well. But this is just kind of a good layout. So you can see the contact information at the top, how the sections are laid out. And the only thing that I don't love about this resume is I would never, even though it kind of balances out the sheet as far as the eye goes, I would never bold my dates on a resume, because those really, you're really looking for things to stand out that are super important that you want people to be able to pick out quickly. And dates really are the least important thing on your resume, I think, maybe locations. So look at bolding your company name or your titles or things like that. Your Duke experience, your major potentially would be italicized if you really want to focus on that. Just thinking about what do you want to draw people's eye to when they look at your resume in that 6 seconds when they're deciding whether or not to read it further. Catherine, do you have things to add in about the resume piece?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that I would also change about this example is where the projects are located. So especially if you are going for a tech industry role or a role within the engineering world, I would move projects up actually above work experience. So your new order would be education, skills, and then projects. Projects are really important for potential employers to review. It lets them see how you've used your technical skills outside of the classroom or outside of your standard course of study. And also it can give them some ideas into your own creativity and interest and curiosity in the field that you're going into. So I would move that up. And another thing too to think about placing in bold is where you've used the technical skills that you've listed. So be sure to bold those throughout your accomplishment statements in your resume.
And I will just point out on the technical projects at the end of every one, they kind of have a parentheses with what programs they used. And I think that's great to point that out, and also to be mindful of what you're trying to show with your projects. Some people like to put different experiences for different programs. If there's a company or a position that's looking for a real technical background in a certain program, then showing several projects using that same coding language or whatever it might be really important. So thinking about really showing a breadth of skills, but are they also looking for depth, and how can you show that?
Awesome.
So we talked a little bit earlier about transferable skills, and I think this is where people kind of get stuck as far as like, should I put my waitress experience on there? Should I put my retail experience on my resume? I spoke to a student the other day who had worked at the McDonald's in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, and apparently that McDonald's was just like really well known for being crazy and a little bit dangerous, and so it was just kind of like an interesting experience that she could talk about, but she was like, but it's McDonald's, do I leave it on there? But it actually was a really captivating story when she got to talking about it, because I was like, I don't think about Haight-Ashbury and McDonald's. I think, 60s war protests and things like that. So anyways, those kinds of things are obviously always up to you. You don't have to put everything right now on your resume, but think about, what did you learn from that? Did you learn how to develop relationships with people and interact with people in a positive way, customer service skills, even just listening skills? How did you, manage your time? Were you able to get everything right? Were you always right in your drawer? Like, there are tons of things that come out of each of the experiences that we have. So even though something might not be finance related, but that's the job that you're going for, what are the skills that came out of that job that may be transferable to that? So these are a huge amount of skills that I think are used across pretty much every industry, and you can show them in all kinds of different ways. And so just kind of being mindful of that and thinking about, okay, how am I showing these on my resume? Because these are also sometimes what people call soft skills. And we don't really love that word because it implies that they're not as important as technical skills, but show me a job that you can be successful at if you're bad at communicating. And I feel like you can understand how important all of these skills are as well.
So now we're going to start to look at your accomplishment statements. And I usually like to preface this with, in my opinion, I think accomplishment statements are sometimes the hardest thing to write on your resume. So we're going to spend a little bit of time going over sort of a format for them and hopefully give you some time to practice. But it's through these accomplishment statements that you can share the transferable skills that Jen was talking about, also your technical skills, and really showcase the qualifications or requirements that an employer is looking for in the job that you're applying to. So at the end of the day, your accomplishment statements are really going to tell your story. They're going to share the what you did, but also the how and why you did it. So results and impact. And it's going to give a little bit about your particular role too. So let's really get into like what this looks like. This is a formula that we use to help you write your accomplishment statements. So you're always going to start with an action verb. In this example, coordinated is the chosen action verb. Think something strong. So for example, supported is a great action verb, but if I'm reading your accomplishment statement and a few words or phrases later, I get to organized, I might recommend that you put organized first and rework that statement, because organized is just a little bit more strong than supported sometimes. So thinking about strong action verbs, then you're going to tell the project or activity that you're working on, the what you were doing. In this case, 3 fundraising events for local shelters. Lots of times I see students stop there, and I kind of consider that the core of your accomplishment statements, but don't stop there. So once you've got an accomplishment statement on paper, have a look at it and ask yourself if it also shares the result, which is oftentimes the thing that gets left out. But when you add a result, it shares the full picture of your work. It also gives a really good idea of scale, the, the tools that you were using, technical skills are included in that. And then also gives a really good view into the transferable skills that you were using. So in this example, we wind up with an accomplishment statement that includes a dollar amount, $8,000 was raised, 20% over the goal. So we're seeing not only success, but how much more of a success, and improving community awareness. So again, that impact. So it paints the full picture when you can use things like quantitative data. If it's part of your research and you can share some of that research, that's great. If it's a budget that you were working with, that's also great. If you are going into computer science or you're working with code, you can share how many lines of code you worked on or you used. That's also really impressive. So all of those things together, action verb, the project activity, or the what you did, along with the results. So that includes sort of the how and the why and the outcomes, make up your accomplishment statement. So I want, this next slide is really an opportunity for you to test this out. So I don't know if you ever played Mad Libs, but it was a really old school game where you could write your own funny story. And in this case, we're going to use it to help you formulate your accomplishment statement. So think about an experience. It can be an internship, something you volunteered for, a personal project that you did, anything related to your work that you would want to put on your resume, and think through how you want to share that with an audience. So using the blanks below, fill in either on your computer if you've got a Word document open or like a text note open, or if you just have a piece of paper next to you. Use your experience to fill in the blanks below and complete your practice accomplishment statement. I'm going to put I'm going to say a minute, and then I'll check back in on my watch and give you some time to do this. All right, so that's been about 1 minute. I see we have a question in the chat. So if you're wrapping up, I'll go ahead and answer the question. Olivia asks, for work experience that included a handful of responsibilities, would you suggest just picking the most impressive action or use several bullets in the description? That's a great question. My guideline is to use as many accomplishment statements as you need to describe your work in a particular experience. So you might have 3 or 4 or 6, or you might just have 2. Sometimes you'll see people with 8 to 10. And I think anywhere from 3 to 6 is probably an okay number or a range, but there is no like magic. I say that, but then I'll also say the caveat that there is no like magic number of bullet points per experience. But you will have several skills that you've developed or used in each of your experiences, and so you will want to highlight those.
And I will just say one thing about that is if you feel like you don't have any bullet points to add to an experience, then maybe that's not the best experience to put on your resume. I think a lot of people kind of want to put stuff on there just so people know they've done it. But if you get asked about it and you don't have enough information to even put a bullet point in that, is that going to make you look the way you want to look to that employer? So just think about that stuff too.
Yeah. So Is anybody brave enough to share their practice accomplishment statement? You could type it in the chat, or you can unmute and share. All right. Well, definitely use that as practice. Like I said, this is one of the harder parts of resume writing. And so it does take a fair amount of visits back and forth to your resume to write accomplishment statements that really tell your story. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. All right, so moving on, tailoring your resume is something that you want to do for each resume that you're writing. So once you get the formatting that we've talked about, once you get an idea of the accomplishment statements and the structure for those, now you want to go back to the job that you're applying to or the opportunities that you're applying to, and you want to read the descriptions and learn about those programs because you will want to update your resume or tailor it so that it is targeted and focused for each one of those opportunities. You can do this in a couple of different ways. Researching the organization is helpful too, and also networking is always helpful. But in this case, I'm going to focus on how to use a job description. So really what you want to do is locate the job description, highlight, underline, identify keywords and phrases related to skills. Because action verbs denote the skill, those are the things that you're going to be looking at tailoring in your resume. So if a job description says that you need to be a great communicator, then you want to go to your accomplishment statements and where it fits, use communicated as an action verb. Highlight your communication skill in that way. So don't be afraid to use some of the specific verbiage that you find in the job description in order to tailor your document. And one of the reasons why we suggest this is because there's something called an applicant tracking system or an ATS. And essentially what that is your document will get scanned by a company before it gets moved forward to be reviewed by, say, like a human being. Okay. So the company will identify the keywords it wants ATS to look for in your document. If you meet that threshold, then you get moved forward. So tailoring is really what's going to help you get past that initial review and into the stack for an HR rep to review. So any questions about...
Let me just add something to that.
Yeah, please do.
I think this is also a good answer to Olivia's earlier question. If you had a bunch of responsibilities, look at the job that you're applying for and use the responsibilities that fit that job best. Even if you did 10 things, pick the 3 that are most related to what you're trying to do at this job that you're applying for, or pick the experiences out of all your experiences that most fit the job that you're applying for. I think that's kind of a good answer to that question as well.
So we've talked about a lot today, and so in this slide, we just want to sort of summarize a lot of the key reminders that we want you to just have in mind as you either work on or update your resume. One of them being the skills that you bring to the employer. So these are transferable skills, technical skills, research-based skills, any skills, whether they're easy to measure or not, that you bring to the table. And again, with tailoring, you can kind of pick and choose the skills that you want to put out there to the employer to show that you have what they're looking for based on the qualifications or requirements that they're asking for. And you use your accomplishment statements as the vehicle to highlight those. So if you know for sure that an opportunity you're applying to is looking for a certain set of skills, when you get done writing your resume for that opportunity, just make sure that it highlights those skills in the way that you want it to. So also keep it custom. We've talked about that in terms of tailoring. This is not Lord of the Rings. One resume does not rule them all. So it does mean a little bit more work for you, but it also has to do with strategy and advancing through the application review process. So one thing that can help you with keeping things custom and being strategic about placing things on your resume is a master resume document. So if you create a document that lists everything you've done, so Duke forward, you can use that document to copy and paste your customized resume into your like one-page document that you will submit for an application. What I usually recommend is on this master resume document, it could be 10 pages, right? Doesn't matter how long it is. It's your internal document. But make sure it's already formatted in the way that we've suggested, that you've got everything consistent and the way that you want it to be, so that when you copy and paste, that saves you some time too. And then also have someone double check this. In fact, have multiple people review your resume for you. We have drop-in hours even during the summer. They're hosted via Zoom. So you can go to our website, which we'll share here at the end, for you to just drop in and have someone do a quick review of your resume. Anyone that you trust, friends, family, mentors, have them review it and check it out. If there's a certain story that you want to tell, ask them if that story comes through. If there are certain skills that you know you need to highlight, double check with them. Not just that it's readable and easily consumed, but also does it share the story that you want it to share? And then, finally, when you do put in all this hard work and you're ready to send it, make sure you send your resume and cover letter as a PDF. This ensures that the document that you know and love looks like that same document when it's opened on a different screen somewhere else. So your formatting will not get moved around or changed. So always save that as a PDF and make sure your name is in the file, because it just makes it easier for the person on the other end. So Jen, are there any other thoughts that you have or things that I might have missed?
I don't think it's anything that you missed, but with the double check thing, spell check. I think that sometimes we forget that it's so easy just to do the ABC button and it checks the document, but a misspelling or a wrong word can actually cause people just to say, oh, this person didn't even spend the time to make sure their resume was right. It's an easy way to weed out if you have 100 different things that you're looking at and you're looking for the best people. It seems a little bit arbitrary, but if you have 5 great candidates, they all have similar experience and one doesn't have a perfect resume, then that might be the person that they choose to pick out. So just be careful with that stuff.
So any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or unmute if you prefer. So Jocelyn is recommending Grammarly for spell checking and catching other mistakes in resumes and cover letters. Thank you for that recommendation. I've heard good things about it. I've never used it myself, so thanks for that.
It's the best investment. It's the best investment, I think, for sure.
Awesome.
Especially if you know you have creative spelling, that's probably a great, or grammar issues. Yep. And we do have tons of resources online. Amrita, I'll get your answer or that answer in just a second. We have tons of resources online. We have some resume modules that walk you through all this stuff kind of separately, from tailoring to accomplishment statements to just the regular formatting. So if you need a refresher on any of this stuff, or we went too fast, or you feel like we didn't cover something, those might be great places to check out. And those are all on the Career Center website. And in answer to this question, do you recommend we not put standard major requirements in the relevant coursework section? I would say if it is a course that you think that every computer science program in the country is teaching as part of their core requirements, I don't think it's necessary. If you have taken it ahead of schedule, and so you feel like as potentially a sophomore, you might be further ahead than other sophomores might be, then yes, if it's going to make you more marketable or show some skill that people would otherwise assume that you didn't have. But if it's coursework that every CS major across the country is probably taking as part of their major in computer science, then I would say it's not necessary. But again, all these things really are personal preference. So if something is really important to you and you really want to get across that note or that skill or that focus or interest, then go ahead and do it. Because you want a document that represents you and the skills that you bring to the table. So if that's something that's super important to you, I think that's okay.
I would also add to that to add to part of the confusion around resumes, or the like it depends component around resumes, companies do sometimes have things that they prefer to see. And for CS majors in particular, data structures and algorithms are those classes that they do like to see in your relevant coursework section. It may not be important for every tech company that's hiring, but if you go to a Google info session or a Google resume review on our campus, they're going to tell you to put data structures and algorithms in your relevant coursework section. So there's not always a perfect answer or like a constant. To Jen's point, it's really your document and up to you at the end of the day to tell your story. But you will hear companies ask for specific things on their resumes. And so again, that's where the tailoring and the research around that becomes super important.
And one thing we didn't touch on is interests, which oftentimes people have an interests line on their resume. And the one thing that I will say about that is the whole point of that line is to make a connection with a recruiter or an interviewer or somebody who is using or reviewing your resume, to give them some sort of hook for you as a person, particularly like an icebreaker if you're interviewing with someone. So you want those interests to be as specific as possible. So we see a lot of traveling, cooking, reading. So what do you like to cook? Where do you like to travel? What kinds of books do you like to read? A lot of people put Duke basketball as one of their interests, which, especially if you get an alumni, that's probably something that you're going to connect with that person with, right? So just thinking about how can you be specific enough that you could potentially connect with an interviewer. Somebody might, because they see that on your resume, say, oh, well, let me read this resume further. It won't necessarily get you to the interview, but I think it can be really helpful in the interview.
I wanted to ask, I'm interested in UX UI, and I know that the resumes for that are a little bit more designy than like maybe software engineering or something like that. And so I'm wondering if there are any resources specific to that you have on the website.
We don't have anything specific to UX UI. There are a couple of more artistic resumes, but you may look through just Google UX resumes and see if there are formats that you like. Obviously, one of the big pieces of that position is how do I make something attractive to someone and make them want to engage in this information, right? So they want to see maybe an example of how you do that with your resume. So I think it's just really a matter of if you have graphic design skills or really good aesthetic skills, you can create your own template to make it look the way you want to look, or you can try and find examples online.
Okay, thank you.
I would also add to that if you find a template that you really like, don't necessarily get stuck on the sections that they pre-populate it with. I would still focus on the sections that we recommend on our site. Lots of times templates will guide you to have sections on your resume that you don't really need. So don't be afraid to change the sections that are on the template.
Yeah. And oftentimes some of those templates will have really cool ways of highlighting your technical skills and your proficiency in those. So that can kind of be a cool thing too with something like UX that's a little bit more creative, to be able to show I have all these things and maybe 4 dots is my proficiency in that, 2 dots is my proficiency on something, and it's a little bit more graphic.
Well, that reminds me too about color, because I think I see more color on design specific resumes or UX UI resumes. I always say use color with caution. However, I think depending on where you're applying to and the way your resume is set up, you might find that color becomes something that's helpful to you. But again, that's specific to your area of focus and the job role that you're going for. That's not necessarily the same for other job roles. So UX UI specifically might have that flexibility.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, we really encourage people to make use of our one-on-one appointments, our drop-in hours, our resources online. We've tried to really put together a bunch of stuff to help students out. So please let us know if you have questions or are struggling with something or anything that we can help you with.
So I think one last time, just to see if we've boosted your confidence at all today, specifically around tailoring your resume or the customization, just throw in the chat your number. If it's it can be the same or hopefully it's different, but throw it in the chat and let's see where we're at.
See some positive movement, so that's good.
Yeah, 4s. That's great. Yeah. Holding steady there. All right.
And again, the more you do it and the more you practice it, the easier, particularly accomplishment statements are going to be. Even they're still never easy, but the more that you work with it, the better off you'll be, the easier it will get. I will also say at some point, just be okay that this is the best version that you can get. You can tweak it and tweak it and tweak it till you drive yourself crazy. But at some point, just say, hey, this is my resume. It's good. I like it. People have looked at it. I've gotten feedback. This is what we're going forward with. So,
yeah. Best advice of the day. So here are the resources that we talked about. But again, we'll share this with Sandra, and she hopefully can share it out with you all. And you can also anytime visit our website. It has all of the resources that were previously linked. So you can just check it out there.
Yeah, I will add all of those resources to our website, so that way everyone can access them, even people who weren't here today but are going to watch this video later.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.